Good evening, everybody, and welcome along to this edition of Heroes and Icons on LearMedia.tv. My name is Pat Barry, and we're going to concentrate tonight on the man behind me there, if you can see him, Jack Donahue. Now, to some people, he was a hero. To us here in this program, he was an icon of some sort anyway. But it's not for us to judge history, I suppose. These things are generally framed in the time and the events that occurred around the same time as well. And really, we want to thank you for our first two editions of Heroes and Icons, for the people who took the time out to view them, to look at our programs and give us feedback. It's very much appreciated. And you can also give us any feedback on any of the programs. Info@learmedia.tv is our email. And I'm Pat Barry, and I'm your host for the next 20 minutes or so. We do a little thumbnail, that's what we do, and maybe encourage you to read a little bit more history, which is always good for the soul anyway. Now, Jack Donahue is the focus of our program today, and of course the focus of him was a very known folk song that began in Australia, which was the Wild Colonial Boy. Now, there has been many versions of the Wild Colonial Boy, depending on who was singing it, depending on the country that it was being sung in, and sometimes the name of the main characters or character in it has been changed, but it doesn't take away from the fact. Now, Wild Colonial Boys was a generic term for many people who were known as well as bush rangers as well, which, as you know, Australia was a place where, particularly in the British Empire, when they ruled over our country as well here in Ireland, that anybody who committed some kind of a crime that they perceived as being very serious, they were sent to Van Diemen's Land, which is known as Australia as we know it today. Hence, all the Irish, many Irish names you still find all over Australia as well. But now, Jack Donahue, the historians settle on the figure in the song was Jack Donahue, and he was born in Dublin in 1804, and he's described in all the little research I did as an orphan. Obviously, an orphan has no mother or father. I know it's a misnomer. You can't be an orphan or a human being except you have a mother and a father, but I understand what they mean by that. He was abandoned, so hence the term orphan. Anyway, he grew up in the streets, and as you know, at the time in the 19th century, 1804, 1810, 1820, the conditions, social conditions at the time, I suppose, determined who you were and who you are and how you behaved. Anyway, he took to petty crime to, I suppose, to survive, really. And he was in and out of court, being fined and being imprisoned for short periods of time. That was Jack Duggan. And eventually, anyway, he committed what they called a serious felon at the age of 19. Which was in 1823, and for doing that, he was sentenced to exile in Australia. Now, obviously, the journey from Ireland to Australia was a challenge in itself, because many prisoners or people who were transported to Australia didn't make it to the other side because of the horrific conditions that they found themselves in anywhere in those ships and those that they were transported in. But anyway, he made it to Australia, and he landed in Sydney initially, and then he was incarcerated. Now, during his short time in prison, what is described as he committed infringement of the rules, so he was subjected to 50 lashes. Now, I know you've seen some of the instruments or some of the things that were used to give you a lash or a beating, and 50 of them, well, they weren't very nice indeed. Remember now that he was only 19 at the time, that's Jack Donahue, and this happened the second time as well, and he was subjected to 50 lashes. So anyway, he devised a plan eventually to try and make good his escape. Because he probably made up his mind that anything other than the horrific conditions they found themselves in would be better than what he was in. So himself and two other chaps by the name of Kilroy and Smith, they made their escape, and off they went into the outback, into the bush. And so began their life of crime, for the want of a better word. Now, some people describe them as heroes because of the fact that they were robbing from the rich. I suppose this is a line that can be shouted out too many times, robbing from the rich to pay the poor. But they were known, that gang that he was in were known as the strippers initially because of the fact that, you guessed it, any rich gentleman or lady that came along, and he would lay them down with riches, watches and jewelry, and then they stripped them naked, so to speak, and everything, shoes, boots, everything, clothes, everything was taken from them, hence the name, the strippers. And of course, then, as they became successful at that, they became notorious, they became well known, and obviously the law and order, they couldn't allow that to carry on. So there was a bounty put on Jack Donahue, said, of £20. You can make up your own mind how much £20 was worth in 1823, I think it was, you know. Now, in 1828, Donahue and his gang, they were arrested, and when they were in the event of carrying out a robbery. And but Jack, indeed, he reminds me of a story I was reading about Billy the Kid a couple of months back. He managed to escape again, but he's not so lucky for Kilroy and Smith, because both of them were captured, tried, and both of them were hanged. That's Kilroy and Smith. And it was then that the bounty on Jack Donahue's head was raised from £20 to £200. I thought that was a nice bit of money at the time, you know. And anyway, Jack then was on his own again after escaping. So he eventually, I suppose, became acquainted with other known people who were operating like he was, and he eventually joined up with about 12 or 14. There was a sizable gang indeed, you know. And they were referred to then in some newspapers and articles as the Wild Colonial Boys, because obviously of who they were and where they came from. And obviously they were referred to in other terminology as Bush Rangers. Anyway, Jack, I mean, they were very successful in evading the law, it must be said. And I was reading a story about them, because they had a lot of support for people who lived out in the bush or out in the outback and all of that, because these people were trying to scratch out a living with very little. They were very, very poor. Poverty was endemic. And so obviously Jack and his gang shared an awful lot of what they stole with those people. And so those people gave them shelter and protected them somewhat. Hence, they were able to be successful. Now, other people would say they aided and abetted them, but that's for another day's discussion. Anyway, suffice to say that that's why they were able to evade the law. And when the law did catch up, sometimes the information they got from the people who were hiding them was incorrect information, and they were sent on wild goose chases many times. You can imagine they eked out retribution to some of those families as well, when they eventually found out that they were fooled by the people who were supporters of Jack Donahue and his merry band. I suppose when you look at the different groups that recorded the song down through the years, you know, that is the Wild Colonial Boy. You had a group like Tommy Makem and the Clancy Brothers had a version of it. There's no doubt about that. In the 50s and 60s, the Dubliners had a version of it. The Pogues, Shane MacGowan, the Pogues did a version of it on one of their albums. Many, many folk singers down through the years, all over America and Australia. And of course, you had Slim Dusty, the man who made a worldwide hit with The Pub With No Beer. He was inclined to sing that as well, you know. But as I said, the words of the song, the original words of the song, were changed somewhat, because even the early days, they changed Jack Donahue to Duggan in one version, to Jack Duggan. They changed it to Dolan in another version, Jack Dolan, because of the fact that they would be seen to, because it was banned, you know, as well by the authorities. So if you were singing about Jack Dolan, that was fine, because he wasn't he wasn't Jack Donahue. If you pardon my difference, everybody knew what the song was about, you know. Anyway, so Jack Donahue, like many other Irish people and men and women, mainly men, who were transported to Australia, they turned to crime. That is, to try and make a livelihood because they were either in prison, and when they escaped, obviously they couldn't get gainful employment for obvious reasons, so they turned to crime. And I'm not making the point that they had no other choice. I'm saying the choice they made was quite understandable. To turn to crime. It was sometimes an easy way to make a living, an easy way to make money, and an easy way to get by if you enjoyed that type of life where you couldn't stay only one night in one place. You know, I don't know really, but I suppose anything would have been better in prison, and certainly anything would have been better than the conditions that he found himself back in Dublin as an abandoned human being on the streets, living on his wits. I suppose he had credibility. He led the gang, and he led the gang rather ruthlessly because he shot one of them when they were found out, because he found one of the gang was keeping a diary of their exploits and where they robbed, and Jack Donahue found out about it, and he shot him dead on the spot and burned the diary because he reckoned if they were ever captured, or he had places and names and dates and events that occurred that could be obviously tied to the gang, and so therefore he felt that he had no other choice, only kill him, and so therefore he asserted his, I suppose, authority over the particular gang. Anyway, you know, that was Jack Donahue. Now, obviously, there was a huge manhunt out from time to time for Jack Donahue and his gang, and eventually, anyway, I mean, there was a determination on the authorities not to have this gang all the notoriety they were getting. I mean, their exploits were, you must remember, their exploits, we had no internet at that time or mobile phones, but their exploits reached our own country, and obviously Britain as well, and America. So, I mean, really, this was a huge, huge challenge and embarrassment to the British authorities in Australia. So there was a huge determination and a huge drive to put an end to these wild colonial boys. Anyway, eventually, the gang split up because there was a huge posse out, and mounted soldiers and mounted police, huge posse out, and they eventually cornered Jack Donahue with four more of the gang, and there was a shootout happened, and Jack Donahue was shot through the head and the neck, and obviously the soldier who shot him was a man by the name of Trooper Muggleston of the 39th Regiment, later known as the Dorset Regiment. So there you go, Trooper Muggleston. You can read all about him as well. So that was the end of poor old Jack Donahue, and he was only 26 years of age when he met his earthly demise. I suppose at the hand of a gun, and he met his earthly demise the way he lived, violently for a lot of the time. But anyway, look, we're not making any judgments on these people ourselves. We're just trying to relate the story, and hope you have an interest in reading more about the particular Jack Donahue there. But some of the gang then that Jack Donahue led at the time dissipated, weren't captured, disappeared into the outback in the bush. And a couple of them joined up with a very, very young outlaw who was hanging around at the time in our part of Australia. That was Ned Kelly. So some of Donahue's gang, who were known as the Wild Colonial Boys and Bush Rangers or other things as well, the strippers, they joined Ned Kelly's gang. And we all know about Ned Kelly's gang as well. And Kelly, of course, is another Irish name, but Shinshkelela, that's for another day. But suffice to say that I remember growing up that there's a pub down in Castlemaine in Kerry called the Wild Colonial Boy. They claimed the Wild Colonial Boy, Jack Duggan. Now, just to clear up something, Jack Duggan was a Wild Colonial Boy. Jack Duggan was in Australia. Jack Duggan did participate in times, but Jack Duggan was not shot dead by the police when that particular Jack Duggan that they changed, that they put into the song, the Wild Colonial Boy, that they referred to. He was from Castlemaine and County Kerry, but he's not the man we were talking about tonight, which is Jack Donahue. So that Jack Duggan can be confused. But look, there was a lot of names put in. I said he was referred to as Jack Dolan, Jack Duggan. I don't know what else he was referred to in the songs. You can look up the songs yourself and all of them. But that was the story of Jack Donahue, the Wild Colonial Boy, as we refer to him here on this edition of Heroes and Icons. And if you have any suggestions for the program or any ones you would like us to cover, please let us know by dropping us a line, info@learmedia.tv. And indeed, you can get all our programs up on our web page, up on our YouTube channel, which is Lear Media TV, our YouTube channel. I think there's 430 programs up there to date. So there you go. For the last 18 months, the output has been phenomenal. Thanks to everybody who gives their time to do programs. And we will have some exciting news in the next week or two for you, but just for something some other day. But our story tonight on Heroes and Icons was of Jack Donahue, a short life, 26 years of age, man from Dublin, who grew up in poverty, lived in poverty, transported to Van Diemen's Land, really didn't ever get a chance or give himself a chance either. I have to say the two things together. Did live an eventful life, and I don't know how he did, but he did. And we will, the last of the Bush Rangers, as they were referred to in Australia at the time, the last of the known Bush Rangers, God knows there was many of them, nobody knew who they were, but the last of the recognised known ones lived up to the 1950s, I think, and I saw a reference there to some fella. But we will pick up that thread, that theme in another program. So suffice to say, as you can see from all the pictures that we showed during this course, this program, there's quite a lot of information about him as well. That was Jack Donahue from Dublin, born in 1804, shot to death in 1830 as part of the Bush Rangers, the Wild Colonial Boys gang, and sadly passed away. Sadly, short life finished at the age of 26. Jack Donahue. So you can learn the air, and I'm not dare going to try to sing the song for you, just in case you might think I would. I'm not paid enough to do that. But for this edition of Heroes and Icons on the tragic tale and life and times of Jack Donahue, from myself, Pat Barry, till we meet again, take care and good luck.